Welcome back to this retrospective slash review for Wing Commander 4. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let the opening scene play out in the beginning here while I give you a little bit about my thoughts on the game itself. And yeah, just go ahead and jump into it and tell you what I think about this game. Now, this is a game that initially I'm going to go ahead and be very honest with you all. It turned me off from the Wing Commander series almost from the word go. After I think I played Wing Commander 3 first, and then I did Wing Commander Privateer. And I absolutely love Privateer. Privateer is a great game. And Wing Commander 3 was pretty decent as well. But then when I try to fire this game up, the very first thing that really just smacks you in the face is the difficulty. And I mean, like from the word go, the difficulty on this game is just, it's kind of insane. And so rather than just beat around the bush and come back to it, I'm just going to go ahead and address that aspect of this game first because it is one of those aspects of the game that could very easily turn somebody off of it. And that's a shame. It really is because at the end of the day, there's actually quite a few improvements to this game that should have made it better than all the previous Wing Commander entries. But there's just no beating around the bush on that difficulty. The difficulty in this game is far surpassing anything that came out before it. And that's even including, well, I mean, some of the worst secret mission packs from the first Wing Commander, and along with the fact that it was so hard to play with the stuttering and frames per second, or yeah, the FPS issues that you would have playing those old original Wing Commander games. It was literally on that level of frustration. In fact, it may have even been worse because, I mean, at least with Wing Commander 1, you're sitting there and you know that you're just stuttering and you can't do anything. This one, you just basically die almost immediately. Um, the missile damage has been ramped up so much in this game. Now, it's both a blessing and a curse. More of a curse than a blessing, really, because you can actually take out a lot of enemies with one single missile hit if you line up and get them where they can't really dodge it in time. So it does work for you in that instance. But having said that, you have to manage your usage of missiles. You can't just go crazy and use them constantly because then you'll be out of missiles when you need it the most. The enemy AI, on the other hand, they don't have that problem. And so you can get hit with missile spam very quickly, and before you know it, you're just dead. Or you spend more time sitting there flying around, dropping countermeasures, trying not to get hit by missiles. And it just makes for a very frustrating gameplay experience. And let's just go ahead and talk about some of the other aspects of the game. Now, visually, especially in space, I don't think the visuals are greatly improved over, say, Wing Commander 3. It's basically the same engine. Um, it still looks good. I think the in-game engine itself looks very good, and I enjoyed playing with it. I do actually miss the fact that they took away the cockpit view. So you don't see the cockpit anymore like you saw in Wing Commander 3. And I guess I think I read it in a manual or maybe in the guide or something that came with the game. So no one was using it anyway. I was like, I was using it. I like the cockpit view. So, I mean, yeah, the graphics themselves are pretty much nearly identical, maybe slightly improved. Um, but I actually do miss the cockpit view, and all you've got now is the heads up display is all you can see. So I kind of miss that aspect from the previous games, but it's not a big detractor in my opinion. Um, you know, tractor beams are kind of a pain in the rear end to use in this game, and I can't remember too many times in Wing Commander 3 that I had to use them. But then again, it's been a very long time since I played Wing Commander 3, so take that with a grain of salt. Um, I will say that near planet, the planet side graphics, those one of the big criticisms I had of the game back in the day was how it just looked so outdated, even for this time period. So, like if I was playing this back in 1996 or 97, whenever this came out, it would have looked super outdated, at least for Wing Commander 3. I'd say it still looks outdated, even on Wing Commander 4. There's a slight improvement compared to Wing Commander 3, um, but it's only very slight. Um, Another thing about it is because of that heads up display and your ability to see things, when you're flying within atmosphere on a planet, it's actually kind of hard to see a lot of your instrument readouts and whatnot because the the HUD itself clashes with the backgrounds, and so it's just very difficult to just see things. Um, Probably an aspect where probably having the cockpit view may have been something that would have been beneficial. And basically, if you're flying with the Confederation, you got that green HUD. Uh, Border World, you have the blue HUD, which is probably one of the worst ones as far as visual. And then if you're in the Dragon, you have the red HUD. It's just kind of hard to see things basically sometimes. From a sound perspective, it sounds very similar to what was in Wing Commander 3. This time I wasn't able to use any of my MIDI devices, no MT32, no SC88. So it was just using the standard Windows sound. And it still sounded good. I can't say it was an improvement or a downgrade or anything. It's probably on par with the sound that was in the previous games, and that's actually probably a pretty good thing. So that's definitely one area where things stayed probably about the same for the most part. Now, there is one thing I will say, and like all the other Wing Commander games, I bought this on GOG, and I think that's the only place you can get it still. The cinematics that you're seeing right now are massively improved over what was in um, Wing Commander 3. So Wing Commander 3, the cinematics were very grainy. They were very low res. Now, I mean, technically, there is still a little bit of graininess on this, but this is the DVD edition of the game. So it still is something you can look at, and it's not as jarring as what was there on Wing Commander 3, for instance. So visually, cinematics greatly improved here. Um, Story wise, I think of the more recent Wing Commander games, especially looking at Wing Commander 2, Wing Commander 3, this game has a more coherent storyline. Uh, but now that I also think about it, again, it still deals with a big traitor uh, in your midst kind of thing, which is fine. It's like every single one of these games is like, hey, there's a traitor involved. Only it's not as pronounced as it was in Wing Commander 2 and Wing Commander 3. So I guess that's a good thing, basically. But it just, the storyline is much more coherent. Um, it makes a lot more sense to assert. Mostly makes more sense. I think the whole timeline of everything seems a little bit rushed. Like this whole game takes place in the span of 2 weeks. So I mean, you go through several missions and you're doing a lot of combat and whatnot in just a span of 2 weeks. And if you put it in that regards, it seems a little rushed that they threw that, put that aspect into the storyline. Other than that, I think the story is actually pretty good. Um, it's definitely better than Wing Commander 3. I'll just go ahead and say that right now. I do like the storyline in this a lot better. And especially if you play mostly the way I did initially, it's a much more coherent story. Uh, I think if you stick with the Confederation and you skip the D and E mission arcs, you miss a lot of context of the story, and it doesn't make as much sense. So I think if I were to give anybody advice, it would be like I would say, defect at the first opportunity, and the when it comes to choosing to help the civilians or go get weapons early on in the mission after the J series arc, I'd say for your sanity, go get the weapons and go to Sparadon because the Cersei system is just so difficult. And then basically side with Panther and not use the flashback on civilians towards the end. It makes the first in mission much more difficult, but at the same time, it makes a lot more sense story wise. It's a much more coherent story at that point. Um, and that's the thing is like that once again comes back to the whole difficulty because if the difficulty of this game wasn't so bad, it would be very enjoyable because the story is so coherent and actually well done this time around. It's just not all the gaping plot holes and stuff that were in the other game, especially Wing Commander 3, aren't here in this one. So they actually got someone who did a very good job of putting together a good story. So I just wish that the difficulty wasn't so insane. And that's the thing is, Wing Commander 3 had a couple of missions where had quite a few missions, I should say, where it was just very poor mission design. This game has that from the word go almost. Like this very first mission here was one that was very difficult for me, and I had a hard time getting past it. And I was just like, you know what, this is how this game's going to be. The heck with it. And I stepped away for quite a while, obviously, before I came back to it. And so that's kind of I'd say that's a big indicator that difficulty is going to turn people off, is what it is. Now, granted, just like Wing Commander 3, you had difficulty settings you can put it on. But whereas in Wing Commander 3, when I dropped it down to veteran difficulty, I was able to get through the missions. Even here, on veteran difficulty, the missions were just kind of insane. And I had to go to invulnerability like so many times because the mission design was just so bad. But why am I even doing this? Screw you, maniac. Go ahead, get your jollies off and shoot me so we can get this over with. Anyway, so it's just very bad mission design, and which really just detracts from the game, sadly enough. Other than that, it's a pretty decent game, but I'm going to have to actually I'm going to have to dock it several points, and that's because of the difficulty. That difficulty is just insane, and that's really the biggest downfall to it. So if I were to give this a final score, I would probably say I'd give it an 80%, and because that's how much of a difference it makes. Now, I did get used to the game, obviously, and I did a lot better on my second playthrough than I did on my first playthrough. Then, very good. But it was still like the paleo system. I can't say enough negative about how bad that mission design was in the paleo system. It was just absolutely horrible. Um, and the way it was designed is like every time you came in through autopilot, you got shot in the back every single time. Um, I guess maybe you could have not used autopilot and just had to sit there and wait, which is kind of crappy. But at the end of the day, you know, I don't know. The difficulty is the biggest drawback to this game because otherwise it wouldn't be bad at all. It would be actually a pretty decent game. But as it is, it's not my favorite to say the least in the Wing Commander series, and I had to go to invulnerability so many times just to advance the storyline, and it was just it's frustrating, you know. And when you're playing a game where the frustration difficulty is that high, but it's not frustrating to the fact like where you say, you know what, I can figure this out, I can get through this. That's not the level of frustration. The level of frustration is you're just going to die because we're going to spam you with missiles and you can't do anything about it, and that's a shame. Another thing I also want to point out, and this is not necessarily an issue that a lot of people would have, but for me, getting this working on Linux was just something I couldn't do, which is kind of surprising, to be honest with you. I would have thought that a much older game like this they would have worked the kinks out somehow, and they didn't. And I think it has a lot to do with the video encoding aspects or whatnot. I'm not exactly sure, the details behind that. But if you try to get this to work on Linux, especially the DVD version, that's something they still haven't figured out at this point. So yeah, I did have to resort to playing this game on Windows, which is okay, I guess. That's why I still have my Windows SSD in my computer, so I can boot into it when I do come across that rare game that I can't get working under Linux. And this is definitely one of those games that I couldn't get to work under Linux. So, yep, that's pretty much my thoughts. I mean, it's a good game, and I think playing through it just to experience the story is probably definitely worth it, especially since it is kind of a good wrap up to you as being Colonel Blair last time you play him as the main character. So it does kind of tie things up a little bit and does follow up all the stuff that happened in the first three Wing Commander games fairly well, especially wrapping up Tolwyn's story, because Tolwyn was always a controversial figure throughout the Wing Commander series, to say the least. So seeing things tie up with him was actually a good thing. It's just one of those things. It's like, make sure you're going to have invulnerability ready to go pretty much at the drop of a hat. But anyway, that's it for my thoughts on this game. Thank you very much for watching this video. I'll see y'all in the next one. Take care.